When my son and his wife made me sleep on the lumpy couch for Thanksgiving while guests occupied my bedroom in the family's historic home, they never expected me to accept this indignity with such apparent grace, or to discover 3 months later that my quiet compliance had been masking a carefully orchestrated plan to sell the property they never realized was solely in my name, teaching them an unforgettable lesson about respect, gratitude, and the true meaning of family heritage. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. This photo was taken at our family's Thanksgiving gathering last year. There I am, standing on the porch of the Victorian home my husband Gerald's family had owned for 3 generations. My son Michael has his arm around his wife Vanessa, both smiling broadly beside my grandchildren Emma and Liam. We're surrounded by extended family, everyone holding glasses of apple cider, a tradition since Gerald's grandmother first served it in 1943. What the camera doesn't capture is the conversation that had taken place just hours earlier, when I was informed that the sleeping arrangements had been adjusted to accommodate Vanessa's parents and brother in the home's 3 bedrooms, including the master bedroom where I had slept for the past 35 years. "Mom, we've set up the couch for you in the study," Michael explained as family bustled around us, unpacking for the 4-day weekend. "The Andersons need proper beds because of Robert's back issues, and Vanessa's brother flew in from overseas, so he needs proper rest." I glanced toward the formal study with its antique leather couch, beautiful to look at but notoriously uncomfortable, with an awkward dip in the middle that Gerald had always promised to fix before his passing 3 years ago. "The couch?" I repeated, certain I had misunderstood. "But I always stay in the master bedroom. That's my room." Michael shifted uncomfortably. "It's just for a few nights, Mom. The Andersons are our guests, and they're older." "I'm 65, Michael," I reminded him quietly. "Yes, but you're more adaptable," he replied, the compliment failing to mask the dismissal. "And you know how important this holiday is to Vanessa. Her parents rarely visit." I looked past him to where Vanessa was directing her brother toward the stairs, pointing out the master bedroom, my bedroom, with the handcrafted quilt I had made with Gerald during our first year of marriage still folded at the foot of the bed, the photographs of our life together still arranged on the antique dresser that had belonged to his grandmother. What Michael didn't know, what neither of them knew, was that the house they so confidently redistributed had never actually passed to him after Gerald's death, despite their assumptions. Gerald had left the historic home solely in my name, with specific instructions about its eventual transfer to our son that I had never quite gotten around to initiating. In their minds, the house was effectively Michael's inheritance, with my continued presence more a matter of courtesy than ownership. This misconception had evolved gradually over the 3 years since Gerald's passing. Michael and Vanessa had incrementally increased their involvement in the property's management. First, it was handling maintenance issues, to save you the hassle, Mom. Then rearranging furniture because this layout makes more sense for family gatherings. Most recently, storing their own belongings in the attic and garage because you have so much extra space. Throughout these changes, I had remained accommodating, understanding their attachment to the family home. The property taxes and maintenance costs were substantial for someone living on a teacher's pension and modest investments, and I had considered eventually moving to a smaller place. But being relegated to the lumpy couch while others occupied, my personal space crossed a boundary I hadn't anticipated. As I stood in the doorway of the study that evening, looking at the hastily arranged blankets on the Victorian couch, I felt a shift in my perspective on both the house and my relationship with my son's family. "I've put your toiletries in the downstairs bathroom," Vanessa informed me briskly. "The kids will be using it too, so you might want to shower early." I nodded, swallowing the reminder that I had once carried Michael as a baby through this very house, that I had spent 35 years maintaining its history and character. Instead, I simply said, Thank you, Vanessa. I'm sure everything will be fine. That night, as I lay uncomfortably on the couch listening to the familiar sounds of the house I knew intimately, I began to contemplate the document tucked away in my safety deposit box downtown, the deed to the property with only my name listed, as owner. Gerald had been explicit about his wishes. The house stays in your control until you decide otherwise, Eleanor. Michael will inherit it eventually, but on your terms, when you're ready. At the time, I had gently argued that placing the house directly in both our names would simplify matters, but Gerald had been uncharacteristically firm. I've watched how Vanessa gradually rearranges things whenever they visit, he had observed. How she speaks about when this place is theirs. The house isn't just a property, it's our history. I want you to have the authority to ensure it's respected as such. As I shifted on the uncomfortable couch, I heard laughter from upstairs. Vanessa's, parents and brother enjoying the comfortable bedroom that had been mine. From the kitchen came the sounds of Michael and Vanessa talking quietly, their occasional laughter punctuating the late-night conversation from which I had been excluded. By morning, my discomfort had evolved from physical to something deeper. I joined the family for breakfast, where conversation revolved around Vanessa's elaborate plans for Thanksgiving dinner. "We're thinking of rearranging the dining room," she announced, spreading her table design sketches across the antique table. "The traditional layout is so cramped, and with 18 people this year, we need more space." "Rearranging how?" I asked, sipping the tea I had prepared myself after discovering they had replaced my regular breakfast blend with Vanessa's preferred exotic variety. "Moving that old hutch to the hallway," Michael explained, gesturing to the heirloom piece that had displayed Gerald's family china for generations, "and maybe shifting the table orientation." "That hutch was a wedding gift to Gerald's grandparents," I noted calmly. "It was specifically built to fit that alcove." Vanessa exchanged a glance with Michael. "We understand it has sentimental value," she said in the patient tone one might use with a child. "But practicality has to come first for an event this size. It's just temporary." Except it wouldn't be temporary. I had watched this pattern unfold repeatedly, changes made for a specific occasion that somehow never reverted afterward. The rearrangement of the library shelves for last Christmas. The replacement of living room curtains for Easter. The gradual transformation of Gerald's study into a playroom for the grandchildren. Each change erased another piece of the home Gerald and I had created together, another memory subtly overwritten with Michael and Vanessa's vision of what the house should be. And now, not even my personal bedroom, the one space I had believed remained inviolate, was respected as mine. As they continued discussing their plans for rearranging furniture, I made a decision. Not from anger, though I certainly felt it simmering beneath my carefully maintained composure. Not from resentment, though watching others so casually redistribute my home certainly warranted it. But from a place of clarity about what the house truly represented and what Gerald had intended by placing it solely in my name. "Whatever you think works best," I said finally, interrupting their debate about whether the antique sideboard could be moved to the garage. "You two handle the arrangements. I trust your judgment." My apparent capitulation visibly relieved them, both. Michael squeezed my shoulder affectionately. "Thanks, Mom. We want this Thanksgiving to be special." "It certainly will be," I agreed, already mentally composing the email I would send to Catherine Reynolds, my friend who had recently established her own real estate agency specializing in historic properties. The house Gerald and I had lovingly maintained deserved owners who would appreciate its character and history, rather than gradually erase it room by room. That evening, as I once again prepared for the uncomfortable couch, I slipped away to make a private call from the garden where curious ears were less likely to overhear. "Catherine, it's Eleanor Matthews. I've been thinking about our conversation from last month, and I believe I'm ready to discuss listing the Victorian. Yes, Gerald's family home. I think it's time for a fresh start." As I ended the call and gazed up at the house illuminated against the evening sky, its distinctive turret and wraparound porch unchanged since 1923, I felt a curious mixture of sadness and resolution. This wasn't about revenge for being displaced to the couch. It was about honoring what the house represented and ensuring that its next chapter would be written by people who valued its history. Michael and Vanessa had made their priorities clear. Now it was time for me to clarify mine, starting with the property they had never realized was mine to sell. The week following Thanksgiving passed with no indication that Michael or Vanessa suspected my intentions. Life returned to its usual rhythm. They returned to their suburban home 20 minutes away, occasional text messages checking in. The gradual disappearance of the dining room rearrangement they had promised was just temporary. The antique hutch remained awkwardly positioned in the hallway, family china now stored in plastic containers in the basement for safekeeping. Meanwhile, I was meeting discreetly with Catherine Reynolds at her real estate office downtown. Well, away from the neighborhoods where family friends or acquaintances might spot us and mention it to Michael. "This property is extraordinary, Eleanor," Catherine said, reviewing the detailed information I had compiled on the house's history, architectural features, and unique elements. 3 generations of careful stewardship really shows. The original woodwork, the stained glass in the stairwell, the hand-carved newel posts. You don't see craftsmanship like this preserved so beautifully anymore. Gerald's grandfather bought it directly from the architect's family, I explained, sharing a sepia-toned photograph from 1923, showing the house looking remarkably similar to its current appearance. Every generation has prioritized maintaining its historical integrity while making only necessary modernizations. Until recently, Catherine observed carefully, noting my expression. "Yes," I acknowledged. "My son and his wife have different priorities." Catherine nodded, understanding the delicate family dynamics without requiring explicit explanation. We had been friends since our teaching days, and she had witnessed the gradual shift in my relationship with Michael and Vanessa over the 3 years since Gerald's passing. "The market for historic properties is surprisingly strong right now," she explained, shifting to business details. "Especially for homes with documented histories and such well-preserved features. The pandemic created unexpected demand for distinctive properties with character. People spending more time at home want something special, not just another cookie-cutter house." "What would be a realistic timeline?" I asked, mindful that each family gathering brought new improvements that eroded the home's historical elements. "If we list in January, we could likely secure a qualified buyer by spring," Catherine projected. "The question is, what exactly are you hoping to achieve? Just the sale itself, or something more specific?" The question captured the complexity of my motivation. This wasn't simply about selling a house, but about how the sale would unfold, what it would reveal, and the impact it would have on relationships that, while strained, remained important to me. "I want the house to go to someone who will value its history," I explained. "And I want Michael to understand what's been lost through their gradual dismissal of that history." I hesitated before adding, "And yes, I want them to recognize that their assumptions about ownership and entitlement were premature." Catherine considered this thoughtfully. "So, timing and communication are critical elements. This isn't just a transaction, it's a message." "Exactly," I confirmed. "A message about respect for the house, for its history, and for me." Over the next 2 weeks, we developed a carefully structured approach. Catherine would arrange professional photography after the holiday decorations came down in January. We would list the property exclusively through her boutique agency that specialized in historic homes, marketing to pre-qualified buyers who specifically valued architectural heritage. Most importantly, we established a communication strategy. I would not inform Michael and Vanessa of my decision until a serious offer was imminent. This wasn't about creating a dramatic reveal. but about ensuring that the process couldn't be derailed by emotional appeals or manipulative arguments before it had gained sufficient momentum. "What about your own housing plans?" Catherine asked, during our third meeting. "Have you thought about where you'll move once the sale is complete?" This practical question had occupied my thoughts extensively. The Victorian had been my home for 35 years, containing memories in every corner. But remaining in the same town, possibly crossing paths with Michael and Vanessa at the grocery store or community events while emotions were still raw, seemed unwise. "My sister Julia has been trying to convince me to move closer to her in Charleston for years," I shared. "She's found a charming cottage in her neighborhood that's coming available in March. Perfect timing if your projected schedule holds. It's smaller, more manageable, but still has character." "Charleston would suit you," Catherine noted. "The appreciation for history, the cultural activities, proximity to your sister. A fresh start without sacrificing the values that matter to you." The plan began taking shape with quiet efficiency. I scheduled a visit to Charleston in early January, ostensibly to help Julia recover from minor surgery, but actually to secure the cottage and begin arrangements for relocating. Catherine prepared the listing materials, securing a historical architecture photographer who specialized in capturing the authentic character of period homes. Through it all, I maintained normal relations with Michael and Vanessa, accepting their Christmas dinner invitation, exchanging appropriate gifts, listening to Vanessa's plans for refreshing the Victorian's kitchen in the spring. Plans she didn't realize would never materialize. When Michael mentioned repainting the exterior to update the color scheme, I simply nodded, knowing the distinctive sage green with cream trim that had defined the house since 1923 would soon be the responsibility of new owners who, if Catherine found the right buyers, would likely maintain its historical palette. In these interactions, I discovered a curious emotional state. Not deception exactly, but a calm detachment that allowed me to separate my long-term strategy from immediate reactions. Gerald had often admired this quality in me during his life. "You have remarkable perspective, Eleanor," he would say. "The ability to see beyond the moment to the eventual outcome." This perspective sustained me through the holiday season, through another night on the study couch when Michael's family stayed over after Christmas dinner, through Vanessa's casual remark that we should really convert this study into a proper guest room since Mom visits so often. The irony that they were already mentally reassigning my bedroom permanently to guests, while relegating me to improved sleeping arrangements in what had been Gerald's personal study, was not lost on me. By mid-January, the pieces were falling into place. The professional photographs captured the Victorian in perfect winter light, the morning sun illuminating the stained glass, the original woodwork glowing with the patina of a century's careful maintenance, the architectural details that made the house not just a building, but a historical document. Catherine's listing description emphasized the property's unique heritage. Lovingly maintained by 3 generations of the same family, this architectural gem represents a rare opportunity to steward a piece of the town's history, while enjoying modern comforts thoughtfully integrated to preserve original character. We set the price slightly above market value for the neighborhood, but well within range for serious collectors of historic properties. "The right buyer will understand the premium," Catherine assured me. "They're not just purchasing square footage. They're investing in irreplaceable craftsmanship and documented history." The listing went live on a Tuesday morning. By Wednesday afternoon, Catherine had scheduled 6 showings with pre-qualified buyers specifically interested in historic preservation. By Friday, we had received 2 serious inquiries about the property's historical designation status and tax implications for restoration work. I had anticipated having several weeks before needing to inform Michael about my decision. Catherine had projected at least a month of showings before likely receiving our first serious offer. The careful timeline we had established included gradually introducing the idea to my son, emphasizing my need for a smaller, more manageable, space, and my desire to be closer to Julia. What I hadn't anticipated was Dr. Thomas Bennett, a retired history professor and architectural preservation advocate who viewed the house on Saturday morning and submitted a full-price offer by Saturday afternoon. His letter accompanying the offer explained his immediate connection to the property. Having spent my career documenting the disappearance of historically significant residential architecture, finding a home so lovingly preserved through 3 generations feels like discovering a rare manuscript thought lost to time. My late wife and I dreamed of stewarding such a property in our retirement. Though she didn't live to see this home, continuing her preservation work by maintaining this architectural legacy would honor her memory while satisfying my professional commitment to historical conservation. Catherine called me immediately. "I've never seen an offer come together this quickly for a property in this price range," she said, the excitement evident in her voice. "And he's perfect. Exactly the type of buyer we hope to find. His reputation in preservation circles is impeccable." "He's offering full asking price?" I confirmed, slightly stunned by the rapid development. "Full asking, minimal contingencies, flexible closing date to accommodate your timeline." Catherine paused before adding, "Eleanor, this is the ideal scenario. We discussed, just happening much faster than expected. The question is, are you ready to tell Michael?" That was indeed the question. My carefully structured timeline had compressed from weeks into days. The cushion I had planned for gradually preparing my son for this significant change had evaporated. Now I faced the necessity of direct communication about a decision that would fundamentally alter our family dynamics. "I'll tell him tomorrow," I decided after considering the situation. Sunday dinner at my house, our house, has been a tradition when weather permits. I'll invite them over and explain my decision in person. "Would you like me to be present?" Catherine offered. "Sometimes having a neutral third party can help manage emotional reactions." I considered this thoughtful suggestion, but ultimately declined. "This needs to be a family conversation, but I appreciate the offer." After hanging up, I stood in the center of the Victorian's living room, the space where Gerald and I had celebrated holidays, where Michael had opened Christmas presents as a child, where family photographs chronicled gatherings across decades. The house contained our history, but it was not the repository of our relationships. Those existed in shared experiences and memories, not in wooden beams and plaster walls, no matter how lovingly maintained. With that clarity, I sent Michael a text message. "Would love to have you, Vanessa, and the kids for Sunday dinner tomorrow. There's something important I'd like to discuss with you all." His reply came quickly. "Sounds great, Mom. Vanessa was just saying we should check in on you. The usual time? Need us to bring anything?" "Just yourselves," I responded, adding, "and perhaps open minds and hearts." This cryptic addition prompted a follow-up question. "Everything okay?" "Everything is evolving," I answered truthfully. "See you tomorrow at 5. That evening, I prepared for what would likely be one of my last family dinners in the Victorian. I selected Gerald's favorite recipes: pot roast with root vegetables, fresh bread from the family recipe his grandmother had brought from Europe, the apple crumble he had always claimed could settle any disagreement before the first bite. As I moved through the familiar rituals of preparation in the kitchen where I had cooked thousands of meals, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. Nostalgia for the life Gerald and I had shared within these walls, sadness that our son had so quickly prioritized modernization over preservation, determination to ensure the home's legacy continued through more appreciative hands, and a growing excitement about my own fresh start in Charleston. The house deserved owners who would value its story, and I deserved to write the next chapter of my own story. Not merely exist as a footnote in my son's narrative about the family home he had prematurely claimed as his own. Tomorrow would bring difficult conversations and likely emotional reactions. But it would also bring clarity and eventually the opportunity for more authentic relationships built on mutual respect rather than unexamined assumptions and entitlement. As I checked the roast one final time before bed, I glanced up at the small oil painting hanging beside the kitchen window, a rendition of the house as it had appeared in 1923, painted by Gerald's grandmother. Soon this painting would hang in my Charleston cottage, a reminder not of what I had lost, but of what I had valued enough to ensure its proper stewardship for the future. Sunday afternoon arrived with a clarity of purpose that surprised me. After months of quietly acknowledging the shifting dynamics in my relationship with Michael and Vanessa, the gradual erosion of my role from matriarch to inconvenient houseguest in my own home, the impending conversation felt not like a confrontation, but like a necessary recalibration of truth. I set the dining room table with Gerald's grandmother's china, the pieces Vanessa had deemed too fragile for regular use, and had stored away in favor of modern, dishwasher-safe dinnerware. The linen tablecloth that had graced family celebrations for generations was freshly pressed, and in the center of the table stood the crystal vase Gerald had given me on our 25th anniversary, filled with winter camellias from the garden his grandfather had designed. These weren't passive-aggressive choices meant to weaponize family heirlooms. Rather, they were a quiet reminder of the home's history and the care with which each generation had maintained both the physical property and the traditions it housed, a visual context for the conversation ahead. The doorbell rang precisely at 5 o'clock, Vanessa's punctuality being one of her more admirable traits. I smoothed my dress, a deep blue that Gerald had always said brought out my eyes, and opened the door to my son's family. Grammy, Emma, called, wrapping her arms around my waist while Liam, now 7, held up a slightly wilted bunch of daffodils. "I picked these from our yard," he announced proudly. "Mom said they're the first ones of the year." "They're beautiful," I said, genuinely touched by the gesture. Whatever complications existed between the adults, my relationship with my grandchildren remained uncomplicated and precious. Michael kissed my cheek, his expression showing a hint of curiosity about the important discussion I had mentioned. Vanessa followed, her gaze immediately taking inventory of the formal table setting visible through the dining room doorway. "We've gone fancy tonight," she observed, handing me a bottle of wine. "Special occasion?" "In a way," I acknowledged, leading them into the living room where I had laid out a simple cheese board and Gerald's favorite spiced nuts, his mother's recipe that had always marked significant family discussions. The next half-hour passed in the familiar rhythm of family small talk. Emma's ballet recital preparations, Liam's science fair project, Michael's latest work challenges, Vanessa's committee responsibilities at the children's school. I listened attentively, asking appropriate questions, all while aware of the document folder resting on the sideboard, the accepted offer letter from Dr. Bennett, the preliminary closing documents Catherine had prepared, the brochure for my Charleston cottage. When the timer chimed for the roast, I excused myself to the kitchen, Michael following to help carry dishes as he often did. "So, what's this important discussion, Mom?" he asked quietly while Vanessa was occupied helping the children wash their hands. "You've seemed a bit different tonight." I met my son's eyes, Gerald's eyes, really, the same warm brown that had always been able to read my thoughts before I voiced them. "Let's get everyone settled at dinner first," I suggested. "It's something I'd like to discuss as a family." He nodded, respecting my preference, though the slight furrow of his brow betrayed his growing concern. Once we were all seated, the food served, and the initial appreciative comments about the meal exchanged, a natural lull in conversation presented itself. I took a deliberate breath, centering myself for what would inevitably be a difficult moment. "I've made a significant decision that will affect all of us," I began, my voice steady despite the anxious flutter in my chest. "I've decided to sell the Victorian and relocate to Charleston to be near Julia." The silence that followed was absolute. The kind of stunned quiet that occurs when words are heard but not immediately processed. Michael froze with his fork halfway to his mouth, Vanessa's eyes widened in obvious surprise. Even the children sensed the sudden tension, looking between the adults with uncertainty. Michael recovered first. Sell? Mom, what are you talking about? This is our family home. You can't just sell it. The possessive our was telling, not your home, but our family home. The assumption of communal ownership that had never legally existed but had been allowed to develop unchallenged. Actually, I can, I replied gently but firmly. The house is solely in my name. It always has been, even after your father passed. But Dad always said, Michael began, his complexion reddening slightly. Your father said many things about the house being part of your inheritance, I acknowledged. And that was always the intention, eventually. But he specifically left the property in my name, with the timing and circumstances of its transfer, to be my decision. Vanessa, who had been unnaturally still throughout this exchange, suddenly found her voice. You've already decided this? Without discussing it with us first? Not just decided, I clarified, reaching for the folder on the sideboard. I've accepted an offer from a very qualified buyer, a retired history professor who specializes in architectural preservation. He's committed to maintaining the home's historical integrity. I placed Dr. Bennett's offer letter and accompanying note on the table. Michael stared at it as though it were a serpent that might strike. This has to be a joke, he said finally, his voice strained. You're upset about something. The sleeping arrangements at Thanksgiving? That's what this is about, isn't it? The, immediate assumption that my decision must be emotional or retaliatory, rather than carefully considered, was exactly the dismissive attitude that had characterized our recent interactions. This isn't about Thanksgiving specifically, I explained calmly, though that experience did clarify some things for me. This is about recognizing that it's time for a change, both for the house and for me. But all our plans, Vanessa interjected, her usual composure cracking slightly. The kitchen remodel we discussed, converting the study to a proper guest room. We've been talking about hosting my sister's wedding here in the garden this summer. Making plans for a property you don't own, I observed quietly, without considering that I might have different priorities or plans of my own. The bluntness of this statement seemed to land with unexpected force. Michael's expression shifted from shock to something more reflective, while Vanessa's cheeks flushed with what appeared to be embarrassment or anger. Perhaps both. Grammy, are you moving away? Emma asked in the uncomfortable silence, her small voice bringing the human impact of my decision into sharp focus. I reached across the table to take her hand. Yes, sweetheart, to a lovely little cottage near Aunt Julia, with a garden just the right size for me to manage, and a guest room where you and Liam can visit. Charleston is far, Liam observed with a child's practical assessment of geography. It's a plane ride, I agreed, but we'll still see each other for holidays and special occasions, and there's video calling for the times in between. Vanessa abruptly stood, her napkin falling unnoticed to the floor. I need a moment, she said tightly, exiting toward the powder room with unusually hurried steps. Michael watched her go, then turned back to me, his expression now more sad than angry. Mom, I don't understand. I always believed that the house would simply become yours when the time was right, I finished for him. And that was the original plan. But plans change when circumstances change. What circumstances? He asked, genuine confusion evident. Everything's been fine. We've been helping with the maintenance, including you in family events. Including me? I repeated, unable to keep a hint of irony from my voice. Michael, I've been gradually repositioned from the matriarch of this family to someone who needs to sleep on the study couch because guests require proper beds. My bedroom has been reassigned, my belongings rearranged, my preferences overridden. The home your father and I maintained for 35 years has been systematically redesigned, without meaningful consultation. Put so plainly, The reality seemed to register with him in a way it hadn't before. He glanced toward the dining room hutch, now awkwardly positioned in the hallway where it had remained since Thanksgiving, at the family photographs that had been rearranged according to Vanessa's aesthetic preferences, at the curtains that had replaced the ones Gerald's mother had sewn. "I didn't realize," he began, then stopped, seemingly at a loss for words. "I know you didn't," I said more gently. "And that's part of the problem. Neither of you seemed to consider that I might experience these changes differently than you intended them. That what felt like helping Mom to you felt like displacing Mom to me." Vanessa returned, her composure restored, though her eyes remained overly bright. "When would this sale be finalized?" she asked, her voice carefully controlled as she resumed her seat. "The closing is set for March 15th, I replied. "I'll be moving to Charleston the following week. The cottage there will be ready by then." "So you've arranged everything," Michael stated flatly, without giving us any opportunity to discuss alternatives. "What alternatives did you have in mind?" I asked, genuinely curious about what he might propose. He exchanged a glance with Vanessa before continuing. "We could have discussed you moving in with us, if maintaining this place was becoming too much. Or we could have considered buying the house from you, keeping it in the family." "Those are generous offers," I acknowledged, "but they address practical concerns rather than the fundamental issue. This isn't about maintenance becoming difficult or financial considerations. It's about respect. For the home's history, for my role in preserving that history, and for my autonomy in determining its future." "So this is punitive," Vanessa concluded, her tone hardening. "Because you felt disrespected, you're selling a family legacy out from under us." "No," I countered firmly. "This is corrective. The house deserves owners who value what makes it special, not just as a convenient property with good square footage, but as a historical document written in woodwork and stained glass. And I deserve to live my remaining years as a person with agency, not as an inconvenient appendage to other people's plans." The children had begun to fidget, sensing the tension but not understanding its source. Michael noticed and made a visible effort to calm himself. "Kids, why don't you take your plates to the kitchen and see if Grammy has ice cream in the freezer for dessert?" he suggested, manufacturing enthusiasm he clearly didn't feel. Once they had left the dining room, he turned back to me, his expression pained. "Mom, I'm sorry if we made you feel diminished. That was never our intention. We thought we were helping, making things easier for you." "I believe that," I said sincerely. "But good intentions don't negate impact. The cumulative effect of all these small changes has been the gradual erasure of what this home has meant for 3 generations. And selling it preserves that meaning?" Vanessa asked, skepticism evident in her tone. "How does transferring it to a stranger honor your family history more than passing it to your son would have?" It was a fair question, and one I had contemplated extensively during my decision-making process. "Because Dr. Bennett sees what makes this house special," I explained. "His offer letter speaks about stewarding its architectural legacy, not updating it to match current trends. He recognizes that its value lies in what it has retained, not what it could become through modernization." I slid the professor's letter across the table. Michael picked it up and began reading, Vanessa leaning in to read alongside him. As they absorbed Dr. Bennett's eloquent appreciation for the home's historical significance, I could see their defensiveness beginning to yield to something more contemplative. "He sounds knowledgeable," Michael admitted reluctantly. "But still, a stranger rather than family. Family should be the most dedicated to preservation," I observed. "But when family begins viewing heritage as inconvenient or outdated, sometimes a passionate stranger becomes the better steward." Vanessa flinched slightly at this, perhaps recognizing her own dismissive comments about the old-fashioned elements of the house that she had been gradually updating. "What about the children?" she asked, changing tactics. This is part of their heritage, too. The home where their father grew up, where their grandfather lived. They'll have the stories and photographs, I replied. And they'll have the opportunity to visit a house properly maintained in its historical condition, rather than gradually converted into something unrecognizable to previous generations. The children returned at that moment, Liam proudly carrying a carton of vanilla ice cream. "We found it, Grammy. Can we have the apple crumble with it?" The innocent interruption provided a welcome respite from the tension. I rose to serve dessert, grateful for the practical task that allowed everyone a moment to process the difficult conversation. As I dished warm apple crumble into bowls, adding scoops of ice cream that immediately began to melt against the hot dessert, I observed my family's expressions. Michael looked stunned and contemplative, occasionally glancing around the dining room as though seeing it through new eyes. Vanessa maintained her composure, but her usual confident posture had yielded to something more subdued. The children, blissfully unaware of the emotional undercurrents, chattered about the upcoming week at school. When we had finished dessert and the children had been excused to watch a program in the living room, Michael leaned forward, his expression serious. "Mom, I understand that we've hurt you, and I'm truly sorry for that. But isn't there some compromise possible here? Some way to address your concerns without such a drastic solution?" I appreciated his sincerity but recognized the underlying assumption that my decision was merely a negotiating position rather than a carefully considered choice already in progress. "The sale is proceeding, Michael," I said gently but firmly. "The decision isn't up for debate or compromise. What I'm hoping for now is understanding, recognition of how we reached this point, and perhaps a path forward for our relationship. That includes greater mutual respect." "So we're just supposed to accept this?" Vanessa asked, her voice tight with suppressed emotion. "Watch a family home be sold to a stranger and pretend to be happy about it?" "You're asked to respect my legal right to make this decision," I clarified. "And perhaps to consider that if you had approached our living arrangement differently over the past 3 years, we might not have reached this point." The bluntness of this statement hung in the air between us. Michael looked down at his empty dessert plate. While Vanessa's eyes filled with tears, she seemed determined not to shed. "I need to check on the children," she said abruptly, standing and exiting with the careful dignity of someone desperately trying to maintain composure. With Vanessa gone, Michael's formal restraint crumbled slightly. "Mom, please, reconsider this. If we've made mistakes, we can fix them. We can find a better arrangement going forward." His plea touched me, but I recognized it as coming too late, after too many small dismissals had accumulated into an unsurmountable barrier. Sometimes the best way forward isn't to fix what's broken, but to create something new from the pieces, I told him, covering his hand with mine. "Our relationship doesn't depend on this house, Michael. It exists in who we are to each other, not where we gather for holidays." "But the house has always been part of our family identity," he argued, his voice thick with emotion. "And it will remain in our memories and stories," I assured him. "But it's time for both the house and me to begin new chapters. Chapters that honor the past without being imprisoned by it." Vanessa returned, having regained her composure, though her eyes remained reddened. "The children are asking when we're leaving," she reported, her tone carefully neutral. "They have school tomorrow." The abrupt conclusion to our evening was not what I had hoped for, but perhaps it was inevitable given the emotional weight of my announcement. We moved through the formalities of departure, gathering coats, packing leftover apple crumble for them to take home, accepting mechanical hugs from my still-processing son and daughter-in-law. Only the children's embraces felt natural and unguarded. "Will you send pictures of your new house, Grammy?" Emma asked earnestly. "Of course, sweetheart. And you can help me decide where to place my favorite things when you visit this summer," I promised, treasuring her uncomplicated acceptance of change. As their car pulled away from the Victorian's curved driveway, I stood on the front porch, the same porch where our Thanksgiving photo had been taken just months earlier. The family dynamics captured in that image had been built on unspoken assumptions and unacknowledged resentments. Perhaps now, with those assumptions challenged and resentments aired, we could begin building something more authentic, even if initially more fragile. I turned back into the house, my house for just a few more weeks, feeling not triumphant or vindicated, but peacefully resolved. The confrontation had been necessary, not to punish or exclude, but to establish truth as the foundation for whatever relationship would follow. As I began clearing the dining table, I noticed Michael had left Dr. Bennett's letter behind. Whether intentionally or in the emotional rush of departure, I couldn't know. But I hoped he had read enough to recognize that the Victorian would be cherished by its new owner, differently than our family had cherished it perhaps, but with a reverence that honored rather than erased its history. The next chapter remained unwritten, for the house and for our family. But at least now it would be written with clear understanding of ownership, boundaries, and respect, the essential elements of any legacy worth preserving. Casual remark that we should really convert this study into a proper guest room since Mom visits so often. The irony that they were already mentally reassigning my bedroom permanently to guests while relegating me to improved sleeping arrangements in what had been Gerald's personal study was not lost on me. By mid-January, the pieces were falling into place. The professional photographs captured the Victorian in perfect winter light, the morning sun illuminating the stained glass, the original woodwork glowing with the patina of a century's careful maintenance, the architectural details that made the house not just a building, but a historical document. Catherine's listing description emphasized the property's unique heritage. Lovingly maintained by 3 generations of the same family, this architectural gem represents a rare opportunity to steward a piece of the town's history while enjoying modern comforts thoughtfully integrated to preserve original character. We set the price slightly above market value for the neighborhood, but well within range for serious collectors of historic properties. The right buyer will understand the premium, Catherine assured me. They're not just purchasing square footage, they're investing in irreplaceable craftsmanship and documented history. The listing went live on a Tuesday morning. By Wednesday afternoon, Catherine had scheduled 6 showings with pre-qualified buyers specifically interested in historic preservation. By Friday, we had received 2 serious inquiries about the property's historical designation status and tax implications for restoration work. I had anticipated having several weeks before needing to inform Michael about my decision. Catherine had projected at least a month of showings before likely receiving our first serious offer. The careful timeline we had established included gradually introducing the idea to my son, emphasizing my need for a smaller, more manageable space, and my desire to be closer to Julia. What I hadn't anticipated was Dr. Thomas Bennett, a retired history professor and architectural preservation advocate, who viewed the house on Saturday morning and submitted a full-price offer by Saturday afternoon. His letter accompanying the offer explained his immediate connection to the property. Having spent my career documenting the disappearance of historically significant residential architecture, finding a home so lovingly preserved through 3 generations feels like discovering a rare manuscript thought lost to time. My late wife and I dreamed of stewarding such a property in our retirement. Though she didn't live to see this home, continuing her preservation work by maintaining this architectural legacy would honor her memory while satisfying my professional commitment to historical conservation. Catherine called me immediately. "I've never seen an offer come together this quickly for a property in this price range," she said, the excitement evident in her voice. "And he's perfect. Exactly the type of buyer we hope to find. His reputation in preservation circles is impeccable." "He's offering full asking price?" I confirmed, slightly stunned by the rapid development. "Full asking, minimal contingencies, flexible closing date to accommodate your timeline." Catherine paused before adding, "Eleanor, this is the ideal scenario we discussed, just happening much faster than expected. The question is, are you ready to tell Michael? That was indeed the question. My carefully structured timeline had compressed from weeks into days. The cushion I had planned for gradually preparing my son for this significant change had evaporated. Now I faced the necessity of direct communication about a decision that would fundamentally alter our family dynamics. I'll tell him tomorrow, I decided after considering the situation. Sunday dinner at my house, our house, has been a tradition when weather permits. I'll invite them over and explain my decision in person. Would you like me to be present? Catherine offered. Sometimes having a neutral third party can help manage emotional reactions. I considered this thoughtful suggestion, but ultimately declined. This needs to be a family conversation, but I appreciate the offer. After hanging up, I stood in the center of the Victorian's living room, the space where Gerald and I had celebrated holidays, where Michael had opened Christmas presents as a child, where family photographs chronicled gatherings across decades. The house contained our history, but it was not the repository of our relationships. Those existed in shared experiences and memories, not in wooden beams and plaster walls, no matter how lovingly maintained. With that clarity, I sent Michael a text message. Would love to have you, Vanessa, and the kids for Sunday dinner tomorrow. There's something important I'd like to discuss with you all. His reply came quickly. Sounds great, Mom. Vanessa was just saying we should check in on you. The usual time? Need us to bring anything? Just yourselves, I responded, adding, and perhaps open minds and hearts. This cryptic addition prompted a follow-up question. Everything okay? Everything is evolving, I answered truthfully. See you tomorrow at 5. That evening, I prepared for what would likely be one of my last family dinners in the Victorian. I selected Gerald's favorite recipes, pot roast with root vegetables, fresh bread from the family recipe his grandmother had brought from Europe, the apple crumble he had always claimed could settle any disagreement before the first bite. As I moved through the familiar rituals of preparation in the kitchen where I had cooked thousands of meals, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. Nostalgia for the life Gerald and I had shared within these walls, sadness that our son had so quickly prioritized modernization over preservation, determination to ensure the home's legacy continued through more appreciative hands, and a growing excitement about my own fresh start in Charleston. The house deserved owners who would value its story, and I deserved to write the next chapter of my own story, not merely exist as a footnote in my son's narrative about the family home he had prematurely claimed as his own. Tomorrow would bring difficult conversations and likely emotional reactions. But it would also bring clarity, and eventually, the opportunity for more authentic relationships built on mutual respect rather than unexamined assumptions and entitlement. As I checked the roast one final time before bed, I glanced up at the small oil painting hanging beside the kitchen window, a rendition of the house as it had appeared in 1923, painted by Gerald's grandmother. Soon this painting would hang in my Charleston cottage, a reminder not of what I had lost, but of what I had valued enough to ensure its proper stewardship for the future. The week following our Sunday dinner unfolded in uncomfortable silence. No calls from Michael, no messages from Vanessa, no weekend plans with the grandchildren. The void was expected but still ached in a way I hadn't fully anticipated. When you surgically excise a tumor, healthy tissue feels the knife as well. I focused on the practical tasks of transition, sorting through 35 years of accumulated possessions, deciding what to bring to Charleston, what to sell, what to donate, and what to offer to Michael and Vanessa. Catherine arranged for an estate liquidation specialist to help with the process, a woman named Diane who specialized in historic homes, and approached the task with appropriate reverence. Each piece has a story, she observed, carefully documenting the provenance of furniture that had graced the Victorian since Gerald's grandparents' time. We'll find buyers who appreciate not just the items, but their history. I set aside family photographs, personal papers, and items of purely sentimental value for careful packing. The cottage in Charleston was significantly smaller than the Victorian, 200 square feet compared to nearly 4,000, requiring thoughtful curation of what would make the journey. Each selection became an exercise in prioritizing what truly mattered, what carried essential memories, what represented the legacy I wanted to preserve. 10 days after our dinner, just as I was beginning to wonder if the silence would stretch, until my departure, my phone rang with Michael's number. I answered with carefully neutral, "Hello," unsure which version of my son would be on the line. The angry man who had left my dining room, or the thoughtful one who had momentarily glimpsed his role in our fractured dynamics. "Mom." His voice sounded weary, as though he hadn't been sleeping well. "I've been doing a lot of thinking since Sunday." "I've missed hearing from you," I replied honestly. A heavy sigh came through the line. I needed time. We both did. To process everything. He paused before adding, "I owe you an apology. A real one, not the reflexive kind I offered at dinner." This acknowledgement caught me by surprise. I had anticipated continued resistance, perhaps a renewed attempt to change my mind, or extract concessions. "I'm listening," I said simply. "After we left your house, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about what you said, about being repositioned from matriarch to houseguest in your own home, about the changes we made without really consulting you." His voice grew quieter. "So I started looking through old photos of the house from when I was growing up, comparing them to how it looks now." I waited, letting him find his way through this reflection without interruption. "You were right," he continued finally. "We've been gradually erasing what made the house special, not maliciously, but thoughtlessly, treating its history as inconvenient rather than valuable." He paused. "Dad would be disappointed in me." "Your father would understand the complicated balance between honoring the past and creating space for the present," I offered, unwilling to compound his guilt. "It's not a simple equation." "Maybe not," Michael conceded. "But what is simple was our failure to consider your feelings, your connection to the house, your authority as its owner. That was just wrong." The frank admission touched me deeply. "Thank you for recognizing that." "Vanessa and I have had some difficult conversations this week," he continued, "about entitlement, assumptions, the way we've treated you. She's not ready to talk directly yet. This has been hard for her to process, but she acknowledges her role in making you feel displaced." I appreciated his honesty about Vanessa's ongoing struggle. Growth rarely happens simultaneously for all parties involved. "What happens now?" I asked, curious about how he envisioned our path forward. "Well, that's why I'm calling. 2 things, actually." He took a deep breath. "First, I'd like to know if the children and I could come over tomorrow. They miss you, and I'd like to help with whatever you need. Packing, sorting, anything practical." "I'd welcome that," I said sincerely. The offer of assistance felt like the first tendril of new growth after a harsh frost. Tentative, but promising. "And second," he continued, "I'd like to bring Dr. Bennett's letter back, along with some questions Vanessa and I have about the house's history that we'd like to share with him. If he's going to be the new steward of the Victorian, we want him to understand not just its architectural significance, but its family stories too." This unexpected pivot, from resistance to collaboration, moved me unexpectedly. Not merely acceptance of the inevitable, but active participation in ensuring the home's legacy continued appropriately. "That's a wonderful idea," I managed through the sudden tightness in my throat. "Dr. Bennett would appreciate that perspective." "It's not the outcome we expected," Michael acknowledged. "But if this is happening, we want to do it right. To honor what the house has meant to our family even as it transitions to a new chapter." After we ended the call, I sat in Gerald's study, soon to be Dr. Bennett's study, surrounded by half-packed boxes and the lingering presence of 3 generations of family history. Michael's shift from opposition to collaboration represented exactly the growth I had hoped would emerge from our painful but necessary confrontation. The following day brought Michael and the children, bearing lunch and determined enthusiasm for the sorting process. Liam approached it like a treasure hunt, delighting in discovering old photographs of his father as a boy. Emma showed surprising discernment in helping select which smaller items might fit in my Charleston cottage. "This clock should definitely go with you, Grammy," she declared, carefully lifting the mantel clock that had been a wedding gift to Gerald's parents. "It's small enough for the cottage, and you said the living room there has a fireplace with a mantel too." Michael focused on the heavier work, helping move furniture designated for the estate sale into one room, items for Charleston into another, and family pieces he wished to keep into a third. As we worked, stories naturally emerged. The origin of the grandfather clock in the hallway, a wedding gift from Gerald's maternal grandparents, the history of the stained glass transom, commissioned by the original owners in 1921, the reason the third stair from the top always creaked. Gerald's grandfather had deliberately left it that way as a teenager alarm when his children were growing up. "We should write these down for Dr. Bennett," Michael suggested, pausing in his work. "The historical details that wouldn't be in county records or architectural surveys." "That's a thoughtful idea," I agreed, touched by his growing investment in the proper transition of the house. By late afternoon, the children had grown restless with the sorting process, and Michael suggested taking them for ice cream, promising to return the following weekend for another session. "Mom," he said as they prepared to leave, "would you be open to having dinner with all of us next Sunday? At our house this time. Vanessa would like to talk, and she's more comfortable on home territory for difficult conversations." "Of course," I agreed, recognizing the courage it must have taken her to suggest this meeting. The week that followed brought a steady rhythm of sorting, packing, and planning. Catherine stopped by with updates on the closing process, reporting that Dr. Bennett had arranged for an architectural historian to document the home's unique features before he moved in. Another confirmation that the Victorian would be appreciated for its historical significance rather than viewed as an outdated structure needing modernization. Each day brought small discoveries: Gerald's college ring tucked in a desk drawer, love letters we had exchanged during his military service, Emma's first baby shoes that I had bronzed as a gift for his first Father's Day as a grandfather. These treasures were carefully packed for Charleston, physical talismans of a life lived with purpose and love. Sunday evening found me at Michael and Vanessa's suburban home, a spacious but characterless property in a development where every fourth house shared the same floor plan. The contrast with the Victorians' unique craftsmanship was striking, though I kept this observation to myself. Vanessa greeted me at the door with careful formality, her expression guarded but not hostile. "Thank you for coming," she said, accepting the bottle of wine I had brought. "The children are excited you're here." Dinner was delicious. Vanessa had always been an excellent cook, but conversation remained somewhat stilted until the children were excused to play. As Michael cleared the plates, Vanessa folded her napkin with deliberate precision before meeting my eyes directly. "I owe you an apology," she began, her voice steady despite the obvious difficulty of the conversation. "I've spent the past 2 weeks reflecting on how I, have treated you and your home. It wasn't respectful or considerate." The directness of her acknowledgement surprised me, given her previous defensiveness. "What specifically helped you see that?" I asked, genuinely curious about her journey to this understanding. She glanced toward Michael, who had returned to the table. "Several things. The photos Michael found, showing how the house used to look compared to our improvements. A conversation with my mother where I described our situation but reversed the roles. Imagining how I would feel if Emma grew up and treated me the way we've treated you." Michael reached for her hand in obvious support as she continued. But mostly, it was realizing that we had never actually asked what you wanted. We just assumed. About the house, about your role, about your future. We made plans for your property, rearranged your belongings, redecorated your home, all without genuine consultation. Assumptions are relationship poison, I observed. They replace actual communication with projected expectations. Exactly, Vanessa agreed, her formal posture softening slightly. And I made many assumptions that you would naturally want to downsize eventually, that our taste was more current than yours, that as we helped with maintenance we gained decision-making authority. We both did, Michael added. And the worst assumption was that you would necessarily prioritize keeping the house in the family over finding someone who would truly value its historical character. Dr. Bennett's letter was eye-opening, Vanessa admitted. Reading his reverence for the architectural details we've been planning to update made me realize how differently we've been seeing the same house. You weren't being stubborn or old-fashioned by preserving its original elements. You were being an appropriate steward. The genuine insight in her observation moved me. Thank you for being willing to see it from that perspective. Michael rejoined the conversation. We've been talking about what happens next, how we maintain our family connection while respecting the boundaries we should have recognized all along. We'd like to establish some new traditions, Vanessa explained. Regular video calls with the children, planned visits to Charleston, perhaps spending school breaks together when possible. And we want to create a family history project, Michael added, documenting the stories and memories of the Victorian, so the children understand their heritage, even though the physical house will no longer be in our family. These thoughtful suggestions reflected exactly the kind of meaningful relationship I had hoped might emerge from the painful but necessary recalibration of our family dynamics. I would welcome all of that, I said sincerely. There's one more thing, Vanessa said, glancing at Michael. We'd like to visit the Victorian with Dr. Bennett before the closing, to share some of the house's stories directly, and perhaps to have a proper farewell to the property. This gesture, acknowledging both the significance of the transition and the legitimacy of the new owner, represented a remarkable evolution from her initial angry reaction. I think that would be wonderful, I replied. For us and for him. The conversation gradually shifted to practical matters, the timeline for my move, arrangements for their first visit to Charleston, their offer to help with the final packing and cleaning of the Victorian. Throughout the evening, a new dynamic emerged, one of mutual respect rather than assumed authority, of genuine collaboration rather than imposed decisions. As I prepared to leave, Vanessa surprised me with a careful hug, our first physical contact since the tense departure after our confrontation dinner. I'm still sad about losing the Victorian, she admitted quietly. But I'm more sad about how close we came to losing our relationship with you. That would have been a far greater loss. Her sincerity touched me deeply. Family transcends physical spaces, I assured her. It lives in connections and memories, not just in shared addresses. The following weeks brought a flurry of activity as closing day approached. Michael and the children came regularly to help with packing. Vanessa joined them occasionally, each visit marked by increasing comfort in our interactions. 2 days before closing, Catherine arranged a meeting between our family and Dr. Bennett at the Victorian. The retired professor arrived precisely on time, his enthusiasm for the property evident in his careful attention to architectural details even before entering. The corbels on the porch are original Queen Anne style, he noted admiringly. You rarely see them preserved so beautifully after a century. Michael had prepared a binder documenting family stories associated with different rooms and features when the cherry tree in the backyard had been planted to commemorate his birth, why the pantry had a hidden compartment installed during Prohibition, how the stained glass in the front door had been salvaged from a church scheduled for demolition in 1935. "This is absolutely invaluable," Dr. Bennett exclaimed, accepting the binder with obvious reverence. "The architectural details are documented in county records, but these personal histories are the soul of a historic home." Watching my son share these stories with the home's new steward, I felt an unexpected sense of completion rather than loss. The Victorian would continue being cherished, its history acknowledged and preserved, while our family moved forward with clearer understanding of our relationships and boundaries. The actual moving day arrived with surprising emotional calm. The essential pieces had been transported to Charleston the previous week. The estate sale had dispersed items that wouldn't make the journey, and Michael and Vanessa had selected meaningful heirlooms to incorporate into their own home. As I stood on the porch one final time, keys in hand, ready to surrender to Catherine for the closing, I felt Gerald's presence strongly, not in sadness, but in approval. The home we had cherished was passing to appreciative hands. The family we had built was evolving with renewed understanding and respect. The future beckoned with possibilities rather than limitations. Michael placed a supportive arm around my shoulders. "You okay, Mom?" "More than okay," I assured him, leaning into his embrace. "I'm exactly where I need to be." Later that afternoon, as my plane lifted off toward Charleston and my new beginning, I reflected on the journey these past months had represented. What had begun with the indignity of being relegated to a lumpy couch had culminated in a profound recalibration of family dynamics and personal agency. The Victorian had never been merely a house, but a vessel for family history. By claiming my authority to determine its future, I had paradoxically strengthened rather than severed family bonds. Michael and Vanessa now understood that respect couldn't be selective or conditional, but must extend to all aspects of our relationship. The children had witnessed an important lesson about honoring both heritage and autonomy. As the landscape below faded into cloud cover, I opened my carry-on bag and removed the small painting of the Victorian that had hung in the kitchen, Gerald's grandmother's rendering of the house as it appeared in 1923. Soon it would grace the wall of my Charleston cottage, not as a reminder of what I had relinquished, but as a symbol of the values I had protected. Family legacies aren't measured in square footage or property deeds, but in the principles and respect we demonstrate toward one another. By refusing to accept displacement within my own home, I had ultimately created space for more authentic connections beyond its walls. By releasing the physical property, I had strengthened the intangible bonds that truly constituted family. The house I had sold would continue standing, cherished by its new owner. And the self-respect I had reclaimed would continue supporting me through this next chapter and whatever followed, a foundation more enduring than even the Victorian's century-old walls. 6 months after leaving the Victorian behind, Charleston had begun to feel like home. My cottage, nestled on a quiet street lined with ancient live oaks draped in Spanish moss, offered a different kind of charm than the Grand Victorian. Where the family home had been impressive and stately, my new residence was intimate and welcoming. 1,200 square feet of carefully curated memories surrounded by a manageable garden that provided just enough outdoor activity to keep me connected to nature without overwhelming my aging joints. Julia lived 3 doors down, close enough for impromptu coffee mornings, but not so near that we lost our independence. After decades of occasional visits punctuated by long separations, we were rediscovering the easy camaraderie of our childhood. At 68, she was still vibrant and socially connected, introducing me to her book club, her volunteer group, at the Historical Society, and her weekly walking companions. Through these introductions, I was gradually developing my own circle of friends, people who knew me not as Michael's mother or Gerald's widow, but simply as Eleanor. "You seem different here," Julia observed one evening as we sat on my small porch, enjoying the gentle April breeze that carried the scent of jasmine from the vine climbing my trellis. "More present." I considered her observation. "I suppose I am. In the Victorian, especially these last few years, I was becoming increasingly defined by the past, by what the house had been, by my role as keeper of family history. Here, I'm building something new while still honoring what matters from before. Julia nodded, understanding without further explanation. She had witnessed my struggle with Michael and Vanessa from a distance, offering support during our weekly phone calls, but never pushing me toward any particular decision. When I'd announced my plan to sell the Victorian and move to Charleston, she had simply said, "It's about time," and started sending cottage listings from her neighborhood. The painting of the Victorian, Gerald's grandmother's rendition that had hung in our kitchen for decades, now occupied a place of honor on my living room wall. Visitors often commented on its artistic merit and distinctive architecture, unaware of its deeper significance. I would simply explain it was a family home from my previous life, neither hiding its importance nor dwelling on the complex emotions surrounding its sale. In the beginning, I had worried that distance might further strain my relationship with Michael and his family. The opposite had proved true. Our weekly video calls had a quality of focused attention that had been missing in our previous interactions. Without the distractions of the Victorian's maintenance or Vanessa's renovation plans, our conversations centered on genuine connection. Liam's science fair victories, Emma's dance recital preparations, Michael's professional challenges, updates on my new Charleston life. Vanessa, somewhat surprisingly, had become more engaged in these long-distance interactions than she had been during our in-person relationship. Perhaps the clear boundaries established by geographical separation made her more comfortable. Perhaps the resolution of the property issue had removed an underlying tension. Whatever the reason, she now actively participated in our calls, even occasionally reaching out separately to share photographs of the children or ask my advice about family matters. The true test of our recalibrated relationship had come during spring break, when Michael, Vanessa, and the children had traveled to Charleston for their first visit. I had prepared myself for potential awkwardness, for the children's possible disappointment in my modest accommodations compared to the Victorian's grandeur, for Vanessa's subtle criticisms disguised as helpful suggestions. None of these concerns materialized. The children had been enchanted by the cottage's cozy rooms and the proximity to Charleston's historic district, with its horse-drawn carriages and cobblestone streets. Michael had expressed genuine appreciation for how I'd created a new home that honored family traditions while embracing a different lifestyle. Vanessa had been respectful of my space and choices, admiring the way I'd arranged familiar heirlooms in new contexts without once suggesting how things might be improved. We had spent 5 days together, not in the cramped quarters of the cottage, where such prolonged proximity might have strained our newly balanced relationship, but with them staying in a nearby bed and breakfast while spending days exploring Charleston together. The arrangement had provided both togetherness and necessary separation, establishing a template for future visits that respected everyone's needs. On their final evening, after the children had returned to the B&B with Vanessa, Michael had lingered on my porch, seemingly reluctant to conclude the visit. "You know, Mom, I heard from Dr. Bennett last week," he said, watching a pair of cardinals flit among the azalea bushes that bordered my small yard. "Oh? How is he settling into the Victorian?" I asked, genuinely interested in the home's new chapter. "Remarkably, well, he's had the Historical Society document everything, and he's applying for National Registry status." Michael smiled. He asked about the hidden compartment in the third-floor linen closet, said he found it while measuring for new shelving and wondered if it had any particular history. I laughed, remembering the small, concealed space Gerald's grandfather had built during Prohibition. "Did you tell him about the original purpose?" I did. He was delighted, said it adds another layer of historical significance to the property. Michael hesitated before continuing. "He invited us to visit whenever we're in town. He's hosting an architectural heritage tour next month and thought we might like to attend." This generous invitation from the Victorian's new owner represented the best possible outcome, the house continuing its life as a treasured historical property while still maintaining a connection to the family that had stewarded it for generations. "That's very thoughtful of him," I replied. "Will you go?" Michael nodded. "Vanessa suggested it, actually. Said it would be good for the children to see how the house is being preserved." He glanced at me. "She's come a long way in understanding what the Victorian represents beyond just real estate." "We all have," I acknowledged, reaching over to pat his hand. "Sometimes the right ending requires a difficult middle chapter." On my hall table sat a framed photograph taken during their visit. All of us posed on the steps of the Charleston Historical Society, smiling genuinely into the camera. It contrasted sharply with the Thanksgiving photo from the Victorian's porch, where surface harmony had masked underlying tensions. This new image captured something more authentic, a family configuration built on mutual respect rather than unexamined assumptions. Last week had brought an unexpected update from Catherine. Dr. Bennett had completed the historical documentation process for the Victorian and had sent copies of the extensive materials to her office with a request that they be forwarded to me. The package had arrived yesterday, a leather-bound portfolio containing photographs, architectural renderings, historical narrative, and a personal note from Dr. Bennett. "Mrs. Matthews," he had written, "I wanted to share this documentation with the family whose careful stewardship preserved this architectural treasure for future generations. Your grandson Liam mentioned during your son's visit that he's developing an interest in architecture, following in his grandfather's professional footsteps. Perhaps these materials will nurture that inclination while connecting him to his family heritage. The house continues to thrive under new care, but its story remains intertwined with your family's narrative." The thoughtfulness of this gesture had brought unexpected tears. The Victorians' legacy continued, not through ownership, but through appreciation and documented history. The children would understand their connection to the property through knowledge, rather than possession, perhaps a more meaningful inheritance than mere real estate. Today's mail had brought another development, an invitation from Vanessa to the children's joint birthday celebration in July. Emma would be turning 9, Liam 11, and they had requested a historical theme for their party. "They're fascinated by Charleston's history after their visit," Vanessa wrote. "We thought perhaps you might help plan some activities connecting family stories to broader historical contexts. Only if you're interested, of course." This invitation represented more than just a birthday party. It acknowledged my role as the family's historian and keeper of stories while respecting my autonomy to accept or decline greater involvement. The phrasing, "only if you're interested," marked a significant evolution in Vanessa's approach. No assumptions, no imposition of expectations, just a genuine invitation offered with respect for my response either way. I had already decided to accept, already begun gathering ideas for age-appropriate historical activities that would engage not just Emma and Liam, but their friends as well. The opportunity to share family stories in this context felt like a meaningful way to preserve connections across generations without the physical anchor of the Victorian. As twilight deepened around my cottage, the first fireflies of the season began their luminous dance among the garden shrubs. From Julia's porch 3 doors down came the sound of gentle laughter as she entertained her book club. The neighborhood settled into evening rhythms, dog walkers making final rounds, porch lights illuminating one by one, the distant church, bells marking 7 o'clock. Tomorrow would bring a video call with the grandchildren, a lunch meeting with my new friends from the Botanical Garden volunteer group, and the first session of the memoir writing class I had enrolled in at the community college. My life was full, not with the maintaining of a grand historical home or the navigation of complicated family dynamics, but with new experiences, meaningful relationships, and the freedom to choose how I spent each day. Gerald would have approved of this evolution. "Life should expand with age," not contract, he had often said in his later years. Too many people mistake accumulation for growth. By releasing the Victorian, the physical embodiment of family history and accumulated memories, I had created space for new growth, both for myself and for my relationships with Michael, Vanessa, and the grandchildren. The cottage's landline telephone rang, interrupting my reflections. Michael's number appeared on the caller ID. "Mom," he said when I answered, "I know we just saw you last month, but the children have been asking about visiting again this summer. Would 2 weeks in August be too much? We could rent a beach house on Sullivan's Island so we're not underfoot the entire time." The consideration in this request, acknowledging that 2 weeks of constant togetherness might be overwhelming, suggesting a nearby but separate accommodation, reflected our new, healthier family dynamic. "I'd love to have you all back," I said, sincerely. "And the Sullivan's Island idea is perfect. The children would enjoy the beach, and we'd have both together time and space for everyone." "That's what we thought," Michael replied, relief evident in his voice. "Vanessa has already researched some rental properties. She's found one with a guest cottage that might work well for day visits from you when you don't feel like making the drive back to Charleston." This thoughtful planning, considering my comfort and preferences rather than simply assuming I would adapt to whatever arrangements they made, represented exactly the shift I had hoped our difficult confrontation might eventually produce. After finalizing preliminary plans for their summer visit, I settled into my favorite chair with a novel from Julia's book club selection. The cottage wrapped around me like a comfortable embrace, smaller than the Victorian, but perfectly scaled to my current life. Through the open window came the scent of night-blooming jasmine and the distant sound of a jazz quartet playing at the cafe 3 blocks away. My phone chimed with a text message from Catherine. "Just heard from a colleague who drove past the Victorian today. Dr. Bennett has restored the original color scheme and replaced the porch railings with historically accurate reproductions. The property looks magnificent, honored rather than merely maintained." I smiled at this update, appreciating Catherine's understanding that I would want to know the Victorian was thriving under its new ownership. The house had never been simply a possession but a living entity deserving proper care. Dr. Bennett was providing that stewardship, perhaps more faithfully than Michael and Vanessa would have with their plans for updating and refreshing its historical elements. As I prepared for bed that evening, I paused before the Victorian's painting in my living room. "We both found appropriate new chapters," I told the rendered image softly. "You with an owner who treasures your history, me with a life that honors the past while embracing the present." The painting offered no response, of course, but in its careful brushstrokes I could sense Gerald's grandmother's appreciation for the home she was documenting. That appreciation had passed through generations, from her to Gerald's parents, from them to Gerald and me, from us to Michael, if not entirely, to Vanessa, and now to Dr. Bennett, whose passion for historical preservation would ensure the Victorian's legacy continued. Family histories aren't linear narratives, but complex webs of interconnection, adaptation, and occasional necessary disruption. By refusing to accept disrespect within my own home and by claiming my authority to determine its future, I had ultimately strengthened rather than weakened those family bonds. The physical property had transferred to new ownership, but the values it represented, respect for history, appreciation for craftsmanship, honoring of legacy, remained intact within our family narrative. As Charleston's gentle night settled around my cottage, I felt a profound sense of having arrived exactly where I needed to be, not through passive acceptance of others' expectations, but through deliberate choice and clear boundaries. The path had included difficult conversations and painful recognitions, but the destination justified the challenging journey. The future stretched before me with possibilities I had not imagined, while focused on preserving the Victorian's past. Travel opportunities unencumbered by property responsibilities, new friendships uncomplicated by decades of shared history, experiences shaped by my preferences rather than others' expectations. And within this new landscape, my relationship with Michael, Vanessa, and the grandchildren was evolving into something more authentic than before. Connections based on mutual respect rather than obligation or assumption. We were building new traditions appropriate to our current circumstances rather than clinging to patterns that no longer served our actual needs. The best legacy isn't what we leave behind, Gerald had often said, but what we build that continues, growing after we're gone. The Victorian would continue its life under caring stewardship. The family would continue its journey with clearer understanding of healthy boundaries. And I would continue discovering new dimensions of myself in this Charleston chapter, not despite selling the family home, but because of the clarity and purpose that difficult decision had ultimately provided. Autumn in Charleston painted the landscape in subtler hues than the dramatic fall foliage of my former hometown. Here, the seasonal transition announced itself through golden light that slanted differently through my cottage windows, the gradual retreat of oppressive humidity, and the appearance of pumpkins on neighbors' porches, rather than spectacular displays of red and gold leaves. I had now completed a full year in my new home, experiencing each season's distinct character. The brutal August humidity had given way to October's gentle warmth, perfect for morning walks along the historic Battery with Julia and afternoons, tending to the chrysanthemums that now bordered my garden path. "You've settled in beautifully," observed Patricia, my memoir writing instructor, during our weekly class at the community college. "Your pieces have evolved from processing the past to embracing the present." She wasn't wrong. My early submissions to the class had focused heavily on the Victorian, detailed descriptions of its architectural features, emotional reflections on letting it go, careful documentation of family traditions within its walls. Necessary writing, perhaps, to process the transition, but backward-looking in perspective. Recent pieces explored different territory: my budding friendship with Sophia, the retired judge who led Charleston's Historical Preservation Committee, my volunteer work cataloging artifacts at the Maritime Museum, the cooking club where I was learning Gullah cuisine from descendants of the region's unique cultural heritage. The writing had shifted from elegy to adventure, from memorial to discovery. The memoir class had become central to my Charleston life, providing not just creative outlet, but community. Our group of 8, all women over 60, had bonded through shared vulnerability on the page. We met outside class now, gathering for dinners where conversation flowed as freely as the wine, discussing everything from childhood traumas to grandchildren's triumphs, from health concerns to new romances. 2 of the women had actually started dating again in their 70s, their courage inspiring the rest of us to reconsider our assumptions about life's later chapters. My phone chirped with a text message from Michael. "Just confirmed flights for Thanksgiving. Arriving Wednesday afternoon, departing Sunday. Renting a car at the airport." The upcoming Thanksgiving visit had been carefully negotiated over several conversations. Rather than attempting to recreate traditional celebrations from the Victorian era, we were designing new traditions appropriate to current circumstances. I would host Thanksgiving dinner in my cottage, but they would stay at a comfortable inn nearby, preserving both connection and necessary breathing space. Julia would join us along with her son's family who lived in Savannah, creating a broader family gathering rather than a nuclear family recreation. "Perfect," I replied to Michael's text. "Looking forward to it. Dinner reservations confirmed at Magnolia's for Wednesday evening." This simple exchange represented tremendous growth in our relationship. No assumptions about staying in my home, despite its limited space. No expectations that I would handle all meals throughout their visit. No pressure to recreate elaborate Victorian-style gatherings in a cottage 1/4 its size. Instead, thoughtful communication and mutual consideration of everyone's needs. The previous day had brought an unexpected package from Dr. Bennett, a leather-bound photo album documenting the Victorians' restoration process and its inclusion, in the Historic Register of Significant Architectural Properties. His accompanying note expressed appreciation for the meticulous stewardship that preserved original features despite decades when such preservation was neither fashionable nor financially advantageous. This acknowledgement of Gerald's and my deliberate choice to maintain historical authenticity, often at considerable expense and against contemporary trends, validated our decades of careful maintenance. The Victorian had never been merely a house, but a living historical document, its craftsmanship and architectural integrity worth protecting for future generations. I had immediately called Michael, offering to forward the album to him once I'd reviewed it. Actually, he suggested instead, why don't we look through it together when we visit for Thanksgiving? It might be something special to share with the children. His response reflected our evolving relationship with the Victorian: appreciation without possessiveness, connection without ownership, respect for its significance without resentment of its transfer. We could celebrate Dr. Bennett's stewardship rather than mourn our lost claim. Later that afternoon, I joined Sophia for our weekly walk through the historic cemetery where many of Charleston's founding families rested beneath ancient live oaks, draped with Spanish moss. At 72, Sophia moved with the purposeful stride of someone who had spent decades commanding courtroom attention. Retirement hadn't diminished her vigorous approach to life, but redirected it toward historical preservation and community advocacy. "I've been meaning to ask you something," she said as we paused beside a particularly impressive 19th-century mausoleum. "The Preservation Committee is looking for new members, specifically someone with experience living in and maintaining a historic home. Your perspective would be invaluable." The invitation caught me by surprise. "But I'm relatively new to Charleston," I pointed out. "Surely there are more qualified candidates with deeper local connections." Sophia dismissed this, concern with a characteristic wave of her hand. "We have plenty of multi-generation Charlestonians offering conventional wisdom. What we need is fresh perspective from someone who understands historical stewardship from practical experience, not just theory." She fixed me with her direct gaze. "The Victorian your family maintained for 3 generations. That's exactly the kind of hands-on knowledge our committee needs." The irony wasn't lost on me. After selling the Victorian precisely to escape being defined solely as its caretaker, I was now being invited to share that expertise in a context where it represented valuable knowledge rather than limiting identity. The difference was significant, contributing wisdom gained through experience versus being confined by obligation to a specific property. "I'd be honored to consider it," I replied carefully. "Perhaps I could attend the next meeting as an observer, before making a commitment?" "Perfect," Sophia agreed. "Next Thursday, Historical Society Building, 2 o'clock. Business casual, nothing formal." She smirked slightly. "Though some committee members dress as if they're attending an antebellum garden party." As we continued our walk, I considered how my relationship with historical preservation had evolved. What had once felt like a solitary responsibility, maintaining the Victorians' integrity against Michael and Vanessa's modernizing inclinations, could now become a community contribution, sharing expertise gained through decades of practical experience. That evening, a video call with Emma and Liam brought another unexpected development. They wanted to show me their school history projects, presentations on family heritage that incorporated materials from Dr. Bennett's documentation, along with stories I had shared during their summer visit. "Grammy, look." Emma held up a detailed timeline she had created, tracing the Victorians' history from its 1890s construction through generations of family stewardship to Dr. Bennett's current restoration. "My teacher said it was the best project in the class. She asked if Dr. Bennett would let us bring the whole class for a tour someday." Liam's project took a different approach. Architectural drawings comparing the Victorians' original features with typical modernization changes, highlighting why preservation mattered. "I interviewed Dr. Bennett by email," he explained proudly. He said I asked better questions than most adults who tour the house. Watching their enthusiastic presentations, I realized something profound was happening. The Victorian was transitioning from personal family property to educational resource, its significance expanding rather than diminishing through the transfer to Dr. Bennett. The children were developing appreciation for historical preservation, not through ownership, but through understanding, perhaps a more valuable inheritance than mere property rights. After the call ended, I sat on my porch watching twilight settle over my small garden. The cottage felt perfectly scaled now, neither too large nor too small, but appropriately sized for this chapter of life. Its rooms held carefully selected treasures from the Victorian, pieces chosen not just for practical functionality, but for their emotional resonance and connection to family history. On my desk inside lay the draft of my latest memoir piece, and exploration of how identity shifts when separated from the physical spaces that once defined it. We invest buildings with meaning, I had written, embedding our stories within their walls until the structures seem to contain our very identities. Separating from them requires not abandonment of those stories, but recognition that we carry them within us, independent of physical location. The next morning brought an email from Catherine with news that simultaneously surprised and didn't surprise me at all. Dr. Bennett had approached her about establishing an educational foundation centered around the Victorian, a program that would bring architecture students and preservation specialists for immersive study of the home's historical features. He wondered if I might be willing to serve as an advisor, sharing insights from my family's long stewardship. The request represented perfect symmetry, the house continuing its evolution from private residence to educational resource, my experience with it transforming from obligation to valuable expertise. What Michael and Vanessa had viewed as stubborn, attachment to outdated features, Dr. Bennett recognized as dedicated preservation of historical integrity. I drafted a careful response, expressing interest while requesting more detailed information about the foundation's goals and my potential role. No immediate commitment, but openness to continued connection with the Victorian in this new, more public capacity. As I prepared dinner that evening, a recipe from the Gullah cooking class that filled my cottage with aromas of seafood, rice, and fragrant spices, I reflected on how thoroughly my life had transformed in just 1 year. The painful confrontation with Michael and Vanessa, the difficult decision to sell the Victorian, the uncertainty of relocating to Charleston, all had led to this unexpected flourishing. My phone rang with Vanessa's number displayed, a direct call from her still unusual enough to note. "Eleanor," she began, her voice carrying an uncharacteristic hesitancy, "I wanted to discuss something about Thanksgiving before it gets too close." I braced myself, wondering if some complication had arisen with their visit plans. "The children have been talking about traditional family recipes," she continued. "Specifically, they remember Gerald's grandmother's cornbread dressing that you used to make at the Victorian. I know we're creating new traditions now, but I wondered if you might be willing to share that recipe. I'd like to try making it myself as a surprise for them." This request, so simple on the surface, carried profound significance. Vanessa, who had once dismissed family traditions as outdated inconveniences, was now actively seeking to incorporate them into our evolving celebrations. More importantly, she was asking permission rather than assuming access, acknowledging both the recipe's importance and my authority as its keeper. "I'd be happy to share it," I replied, genuinely touched by the request. "It's actually quite involved. The cornbread needs to be made a day ahead and dried properly. Perhaps we could make it together when you visit? It might be nice for the children to see the recipe passing between generations." The slight catch in Vanessa's voice suggested this suggestion had emotional impact. "That would be... Yes, I'd like that very much. A cooking lesson from you would mean a lot to me, and to the children." After we ended the call, I retrieved the handwritten recipe card from my small collection of family culinary treasures. Gerald's grandmother's elegant script outlined the process she had brought from her Mississippi childhood to the Victorians' kitchen, where it had become part of our family's holiday tradition for generations. The recipe would now continue in Charleston, adapted to my cottage kitchen but maintaining its essential character. Much like our family itself, transplanted from the eye, Victorian but preserving core connections and values while establishing new patterns appropriate to current circumstances. Later that evening, as I prepared for bed, I paused before the painting of the Victorian that hung in my living room. "You're having quite an interesting afterlife," I told the rendered image softly. Educational foundation, historical tours, school projects, more public appreciation than you ever received as a private home. The painting offered no response, of course, but in the last rays of evening light, its depiction of the house seemed almost to glow with vitality. Not a static memorial to the past, but a living entity continuing its evolution under new stewardship. What had begun with the indignity of being relegated to a lumpy couch, that pivotal Thanksgiving that had catalyzed such profound change, had completed a full circle to this new Thanksgiving approaching. Not a circle that returned to the same point, but a spiral that revisited seasonal markers from a higher perspective, with greater wisdom and clearer boundaries. The Victorian had found its purpose beyond our family ownership. Michael and Vanessa had developed genuine respect for both me and the home's historical significance. The children were connecting to family heritage through knowledge rather than mere possession. And I had discovered that releasing the physical property had not diminished my connection to family legacy, but transformed it into something more portable and adaptable. As Charleston's gentle night settled around my cottage, I felt profound gratitude for the difficult journey that had led to this unexpected flourishing. The lumpy couch had been not just an indignity, but a catalyst, the uncomfortable resting place from which a better future had ultimately emerged. Thanksgiving morning dawned with unusual clarity for late November in Charleston. The air held that particular southern winter quality, crisp without bitterness, the sunlight golden and warm despite the season's shift. I rose early, watching dawn break over my garden from the kitchen window as I began preparations for the day's gathering. The cottage hummed with purpose as I moved through familiar holiday rhythms adapted to this new space. The dining table, expanded with borrowed leaves from Julia's similar piece, now stretched from the dining area into the living room, accommodating our expanded group of 12. Grandmother Matthew's linen tablecloth, carefully preserved through generations, draped perfectly across the assembled tables, its hand-embroidered edges displaying craftsmanship that had withstood a century of family celebrations. Michael, Vanessa, and the children would arrive at 11, giving us time for our planned cooking session before Julia's family joined us at 2. The preparation felt different from Thanksgivings at the Victorian, more collaborative, less performance. No longer was I the matriarch maintaining elaborate traditions in an architectural showpiece, but a grandmother sharing heritage through intentional, meaningful engagement. The doorbell chimed precisely at 11. Vanessa's punctuality remained consistent across all life changes. I opened the door to find my grandchildren on the threshold, their faces alight with excitement. "Grammy!" Emma exclaimed, embracing me with the uninhibited enthusiasm of her 9 years. "We made place cards for everyone, and I learned calligraphy, from a YouTube video to write the names." Liam, at 11 now showing the first hints of adolescent reserve, nevertheless offered a warm hug before producing a small box. "We brought something from Dr. Bennett," he explained. "He said it's important for today." Inside the box lay a small silver serving spoon, its handle ornately decorated with Victorian-era flourishes. Attached was a note in Dr. Bennett's precise handwriting. Found in the butler's pantry during restoration. Records indicate this was the ceremonial spoon used by the original owners to serve the first portion of holiday meals. It seemed appropriate that it continue its tradition with your family rather than remain unused in a display cabinet. With gratitude for your continued guidance with the house's history, Thomas Bennett. This thoughtful gesture, returning a small piece of family heritage with recognition of its proper place in living tradition rather than museum preservation, touched me deeply. How perfect for today, I said, regaining my composure. We'll use it to serve the first portion of dressing, the very recipe we're about to prepare together. In the kitchen, Vanessa proved a surprisingly attentive student as I demonstrated Gerald's grandmother's precise technique for crumbling the day-old cornbread and incorporating the particular blend of herbs that gave the dressing its distinctive character. Her focused concentration, so different from her previous dismissal of outdated family recipes, revealed genuine interest in preserving this aspect of family heritage. I've been thinking about family traditions differently, she admitted, as we worked side by side. Not as obligations to be maintained exactly as they've always been, but as connections that can evolve while maintaining their essence. Her insight mirrored my own evolving perspective on legacy, not static preservation, but dynamic continuation, adapting core values to current circumstances while honoring their origins. Michael and the children set the table, arranging Emma's carefully calligraphed place cards and positioning family photographs I had selected for each place setting. Images spanning generations that connected each guest to our shared history, despite the Victorians' absence from our celebration. By early afternoon, the cottage filled with delicious aromas and the sound of overlapping conversations as Julia's family arrived. Her son David, his wife Teresa, and their teenage daughters completed our gathering. The generations mingled comfortably in the cottage's intimate space, different from the Victorians' formal grandeur, but warm with genuine connection. Before we gathered at the table, Michael raised his glass in an impromptu toast. To new traditions, built on foundations of the old, he said, his gaze meeting mine with unspoken understanding, and to the wisdom that knows which elements to preserve and which to adapt. The meal unfolded with a natural rhythm, serving dishes past family style rather than presented with the Victorians' formal service, conversations flowing across generational lines, memories of past celebrations shared alongside appreciation for present circumstances. When the ceremonial silver spoon served the first portion of cornbread dressing, now prepared by Vanessa under my guidance, the continuity of family heritage felt palpably present, despite our changed setting. This dressing tastes exactly like I remember from childhood, Michael observed with evident emotion. Somehow, I thought it would be different outside the Victorian. The recipe hasn't changed, I replied. Just the kitchen where it's prepared. Some things carry their essence wherever they go. After dessert, both my traditional pecan pie and Julia's Charleston specialty of sweet potato bread pudding, we gathered in the living room, where Liam surprised me by producing a carefully wrapped package. "We have something to share," he announced, with unusual formality. "A family project we've been working on." Inside the package lay a beautifully bound album, its leather cover embossed with Matthew's family heritage in gold lettering. As I opened it, I discovered not just photographs but a comprehensive documentation of family history. Stories I had shared transcribed alongside images, architectural details of the Victorian presented with their historical context, family, recipes with their origins noted, even pressed flowers from the garden Gerald's grandfather had designed. "Dr. Bennett helped with the historical sections," Emma explained proudly. "And Dad found photographs in albums you gave him years ago. Mom designed the layout and Liam and I wrote some of the stories you told us." Vanessa, watching my emotional reaction, added softly, "We realized that while the Victorian contained our family history, it wasn't the history itself. This album is portable, shareable, and can continue growing as we add new chapters." This collaborative creation represented exactly the evolution I had hoped might emerge from our painful transition. Recognition that family legacy exists in stories, values, and connections, rather than merely in physical property. The Victorian. appeared throughout the album not as a lost possession, but as an important character in our ongoing family narrative. As twilight gathered outside the cottage windows, our expanded family group settled into comfortable conversation. Julia's granddaughters discovered common interests with Emma despite their age difference. Michael and David found shared enthusiasm for sailing. Vanessa and Teresa exchanged parenting strategies for navigating the approaching teenage years. The connections forming weren't dependent on shared physical space or property, but on genuine interest in one another's lives. Later, as the evening wound down and preparations for departure began, I found myself standing with Michael on the small back porch watching the last light fade over my garden. "This has been different from our Victorian Thanksgivings," he observed, "but somehow more, I don't know." "Authentic?" I suggested. He nodded. "Exactly. Less about maintaining appearances and traditions for their own sake, more about actually connecting." "The Victorian served its purpose for generations," I replied. "But perhaps its time had naturally concluded. What matters continues in different forms." As if to illustrate this point, through the window we could see Vanessa and Emma at the dining table, heads bent together over the family album, adding notes to one of the pages, actively engaging with family history rather than merely occupying its physical space. After final goodbyes, promises for tomorrow's planned harbor tour, and confirmation of Saturday's group dinner reservation, I found myself alone in the cottage, surrounded by the pleasant aftermath of successful gathering, different from the Victorians' formal holiday conclusion, but deeply satisfying in its informal warmth. My phone chimed with a message from Dr. Bennett. "Educational Foundation Proposal, approved by Historical Society Board. Would value your input as we develop programming. No rush to respond. Enjoy your family time." Another evolution of the Victorians' legacy, extending its significance beyond private ownership into public education. Later that evening, as I prepared for bed, I realized something fundamental had shifted during this first post-Victorian Thanksgiving. The complicated emotions surrounding the home's sale, the sense of loss mingled with liberation, the concern about family connections without the physical anchor of the property, had resolved into something clearer and more settled. The Victorian remained important in our family narrative, but as a chapter rather than the entire story. What mattered most, the values of respect, preservation of meaningful heritage, genuine connection between generations, continued without the physical structure that had previously housed them. 2 days later, as our extended Thanksgiving gathering concluded and the families prepared to depart, Michael lingered behind the others for a private moment. "I've been meaning to tell you." "Something," he said, his expression thoughtful. "Last month, Vanessa suggested we look at our own home differently, thinking about what elements we want our children to remember as significant when they're grown." This reflection, from Vanessa particularly, represented remarkable evolution, from her previous dismissal of heritage elements as inconvenient obstacles to modernization. "And what did you conclude?" I asked. "That we've been treating our house as temporarily functional rather than building meaningful history within it," he admitted. "We've started considering what aspects deserve preservation, what traditions we want to establish there, how to create the kind of home that becomes more than just a building to our children." This thoughtful reconsideration of their relationship to physical space and family legacy suggested the lessons from our Victorian transition had catalyzed deeper understanding rather than merely practical adaptation. As final goodbyes were exchanged, plans confirmed for Christmas arrangements, and promises made for regular video calls in between, I felt profound gratitude for the journey that had brought us here. From that uncomfortable Thanksgiving on the Victorians' lumpy couch, to this authentic connection transcending physical property. Standing on my cottage porch watching their departure, I remembered Gerald's favorite quote about legacy. "We inherit from our ancestors gifts so often taken for granted. Each of us contains within us the experience of thousands of generations, We inherit their failures and triumphs, and the responsibility to carry their wisdom forward. The Victorian had been not the legacy itself, but merely its temporary container, a physical vessel for values, stories, and connections that continued their journey through generations in more portable forms. By refusing to accept displacement within that container, I had ultimately freed both myself and those values to find more authentic expression. In the years since selling the house, life had expanded rather than contracted. New friendships, meaningful community involvement, creative expression through memoir writing, evolving family relationships, all had flourished in the space created by releasing what no longer served its purpose. The upcoming week would bring my first official meeting with the Historical Preservation Committee, continued work on my memoir collection, holiday decoration planning with Julia, and a video call with Emma to discuss her school heritage project. Life continued its forward momentum, enriched rather than diminished by the significant transition I had navigated. That evening, as Charleston's gentle winter darkness settled around my cottage, I paused before the Victorian's painting, still, holding its place of honor, but now one element among many in a home filled with both carefully selected treasures from the past and thoughtfully chosen additions reflecting my current life. We've both found our proper places, I told the rendered image softly. You continuing your historical significance under appropriate stewardship, me discovering who I am beyond your keeper. The painting offered no response, of course, but in the soft lamplight, its depiction of the house seemed to hold both its past and its future, a visual reminder that legacy transcends physical possession, that meaningful heritage continues through evolution rather than mere preservation. As I turned away to begin preparing for bed, I felt a profound sense of completion, not the conclusion of my life's story, but the satisfying resolution of a significant chapter. What had begun with the indignity of being relegated to a lumpy couch had culminated in liberation from limitations I hadn't fully recognized until they were challenged. The Victorian would continue standing, appreciated now for exactly the historical significance that Michael and Vanessa had once dismissed as inconvenient. Our family connections would continue evolving, strengthened rather than weakened by the honest communication our confrontation had eventually produced, and I would continue discovering new dimensions of identity and purpose, not despite releasing the family home, but because that release had created space for authentic growth. Family legacies aren't measured in square footage or market value, but in the values, stories, and connections that transcend physical property. By claiming my authority to determine the Victorians' future, I had ultimately strengthened rather than diminished those legacies, ensuring their continuation in forms more adaptable to changing circumstances than brick and mortar could ever be. The lumpy couch had been not just an indignity, but a turning point, the uncomfortable resting place that had awakened me to both the disrespect I had been gradually accepting and the opportunity for significant positive change. Sometimes, I reflected as I closed my bedroom door on this satisfying day, the most uncomfortable moments become the catalysts for our most meaningful transformations. In the end, what remained wasn't regret for what had been lost, but gratitude for what had been gained, authentic relationships built on mutual respect, clear boundaries, and genuine appreciation for each person's autonomy and inherent value. The true legacy worth preserving. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.